Music of the Soul Prelude, Chapter 9. The clouds overhead boiled, bubbling in varying shades of dark gray. The wind whipped about her, tossing her dark hair into her face in strands, whipping her simple brown robes against her arms and legs, whipping the long brown grass of the flat field around her back and forth viciously, and whistling through the distant stand of trees, whose leaves and branches trembled as they were tugged back and forth. The air felt electric on her skin somehow, causing the little hairs on her arms and the back of her neck to stand up straight, though the force of air pressure threatened to crush them down. Suddenly, the clouds began to swirl in on themselves, creating a funnel that began smaller than her little finger, and then grew in both length and girth as it reached towards the ground. Part of her was afraid of the twister that reached towards the ground and of the other three that started forming in the sky surrounding her, but the greatest portion of her was relieved, even happy, to see it. A small part of her, the part that was afraid, knew that it was a dream, but strangely that neither changed nor stopped it. The first twister finally touched down in the distance, broad enough to wipe out a strip mall in the swirling cloud of dirt and debris that it quickly gathered around itself as it spun out of control, almost black as night, towards her. The three surrounding her touched down, as dark as the first, kicking up their own clouds of debris as the first one ripped apart a large farm building in the distance, rendering it to little more than timbers that looked like twigs and planks of wood and siding that could have been paper. She did not run. There was nowhere she could run anyway, but even had she not been surrounded, she would not have run anyway. Just as in her other dreams, Krista ran towards the first funnel, the largest, now broad enough to consume everything in her line of sight. She knew she would have to hold on to something that was deeply rooted in the ground to keep from being pushed away in the cloud of debris that surrounded the funnel, but she would only hold on long enough for the funnel itself to overcome her. Then she would let go and simply let it carry her away until the air pressure, or whatever it was, would crush her chest and stop her heart, or send something innocuous such as a straw or twigs flying through her heart. It is what she always did in these dreams. As Krista grew closer to the twister, or perhaps it grew closer to her, it was hard to tell. She looked around her for something that she could hold on to. Being in the middle of a hayfield meant there would be nothing for her to grab onto, not in time to meet her fate. As if wishing it made it so, though, a steel pipe buried deep in the ground, as though for irrigation, appeared next to her. Before she could reach for it, though, as the wind howled around her, a voice interrupted her. "What a waste," the voice said, feminine and calm, even a little disappointed, and strangely not shouting over the wind, though Krista could still hear her clearly in spite of it. Suddenly, in front of her, with the funnel as an ominous backdrop, Krista saw a woman with raven hair in gentle waves to her waist, and black eyes, but fair skin. Her eyes were shadowed with dark makeup, and her lips painted blood red. Her face was porcelain both in color and nearly in texture, and her black eyebrows drew down in dismay. Porcelain arms, ending in hands with black painted fingernails, sharpened to a point, crossed across an ample bosom that was only emphasized by the black camisole and snug black leather jacket that she wore zipped up barely to the bottom of her ribcage. Black leather pants molded themselves around curvaceous hips and calves, covering the tops of her black stiletto boots that appeared to lace up to her shins. She seemed created by a particularly artistic and lascivious man, and Krista found herself feeling like a dirty little grub on the ground by comparison, as if she didn't already have body image issues enough already. It dawned on Krista that the funnels that surrounded them seemed to spin in place, neither advancing nor retreating, while at the same time the wind had stopped completely. Aside from the twisters, nothing moved, not even the grass or trees. It seemed completely unnatural to her to see 4 large funnels all around her spinning in place without moving, and without so much as a hint of a breeze. That alone should have made her wake up or made the dream change. After all, it made her realize fully that it was, in fact, a dream. But it did not. and that frightened her. Why did the dream not end or change? So much power, the woman continued, looking her up and down in disdain, as though considering whether or not it was worth it to keep such a dirty and worn tool, or whether should just throw it away and replace it. Yet you do not use it. You could do great things, you know. I don't know how, Krista mumbled. You expect me to believe that? The woman said incredulously. You, who only half a month ago called the winds and waters and the earth itself to your aid? You, who on her first day had already touched her own connection, when it took everyone else months to do so? You have poor teachers indeed if you can't light a candle on your own at this point. How did you know that? Krista demanded, suspicion and defiance overcoming her fear, or perhaps fueling it beyond logic. I know all, she said simply, as though it was of no importance, as though Krista should have known from the beginning. I see all. I've seen friends betray you, family abuse you, and peers bully you. I've seen you do your very best, only to be told it's never good enough, that you'll never be good enough. Tell me, little Krista, what would you do to them that hurt you if you could? Would you hurt them back? Make them feel your pain? You could do it, you know. They might even repent if you did. The thought was tempting. She could make people stop hurting her. She could make them feel what she felt so that they would be sorry for what they had done and apologize to her. She realized now that if she could do just that, if she could learn how. Something in her, however, screamed that wasn't right. That wasn't who she was. You're right, she said after a moment of hesitation. I could if I learned how. But that isn't what I want. Then what do you want? The woman asked as she stepped up to Krista, her boots finally moving the too still grass around her as she began to circle her. Speak, and it shall be yours if you but follow me. I can give you power over your enemies, power you can't even imagine. I can give you wealth. I can give you subordinates. All I require in return is that you bend knee to me. No, Krista said defiantly. Whoever or whatever this woman was, something was off about her. Something about her felt wrong, almost evil, and it wasn't just her dark attire. What I want you cannot give to me. Is it death, then? The woman cooed in her ear, sending a chill down her spine. An end to your pain? You were just about to jump into that tornado and end yourself just now, weren't you? I can give you a painless death. That was a temptation indeed. An end to pain, an end to suffering, an end to the bullying and the poor body image and the feeling worthless. An end to everything. But what of her family? They would one day wonder why she had not visited or told them how she was doing. What of the two friends to her name right now? She wasn't sure how Neil would react, but she was growing certain that Ileana, at least, might miss her. That was enough to decide her against it. Barely, but it was enough. No, she insisted. Then I will give you a long, painful, drawn-out death, and then you will serve me whether you wish to or not, the woman said, fury flashing in her eyes like flames. Suddenly, Krista's robes caught on fire, singeing her arms, legs, and torso. She tried to pull the robes off, but for some reason they would not budge. Her skin began to burn as she finally remembered to stop, drop, and roll, but the rolling did no good. All it did was singe the grass around her, though oddly not catching it on fire, while she continued to burn. She could smell the acrid stench of burned hair as the hair on her head began to catch fire, and the stench of burning flesh as she screamed in agony, burning head to toe. Krista awoke to her own screaming, her breath coming in gasps as she shivered violently and only partly from the cold sweat that covered her from head to toe. She looked around, wondering where she was for a moment, before she saw Ileana knelt over her, one hand on her shoulder, her dark eyes furrowed in worry and fear, her long, dark hair unkempt as though awoken from sleep, which she likely was. A single lamp on the wall lit the room, casting a low, eerie glow on Ileana's face and dark nightgown, which really wasn't much different from the robes they wore during the day. Jesus Christ, Krista, Ileana said, leaning back as she heaved a sigh of relief. In the dim light, Krista could vaguely tell that she looked pale. You scared the life out of me. What the hell kind of nightmare were you having, chica? I tried shaking you, but you just kept screaming and wouldn't wake up. Krista rolled onto her side with a grunt of pain. She ached from head to toe, unsure if the pain was from all the exercise she'd gotten lately, or if it was from the beatings she got from Camille for minor infractions that Ileana told her should have warranted a stern warning, if even that, or if it was from being on fire. She glanced down at her hands, surprised to find that they were not an angry red, though they felt like they should be. A dream, she muttered to herself. It was just a dream. I knew it. But why didn't it change or stop? Maybe you should go to the infirmary, Ileana began slowly, reaching out with one hand, but unsure what to do with it. She let it drop. This late? Krista questioned, as she twisted her head to look up at the narrow window near the ceiling. All was dark outside, and she could vaguely make out a smattering of stars blinking in the black velvet sky. I don't need any more beatings for breaking rules. We both know those beatings are a farce, Ileana said fiercely. She didn't seem to like the fact that her new friend was being beaten. You weren't even unkempt this last time. Your robe was as immaculate as you keep your hair, and I don't think I've seen anyone keep their hair as neat as you keep yours. Malik just wanted an excuse to have you beaten again. Anyway, I don't think they would. Well, no, they probably would. And here I thought I had it hard, only being a first generation. Fine, I'll go fetch Lillian for you. Please don't, Krista said quickly, fervently, reaching out with an achy, painful arm as if to stop her, but she didn't know what she could do. Her whole body ached, head to toe, and she was unsure how well she could get around to her classes that day, 2 weeks after she'd first come. I don't want you getting into trouble for being out late. You're sitting there bruised practically head to toe, having nightmares that keep me awake, being beaten every day for doing nothing wrong, and you're concerned about me, the troublemaker who seems to look for ways to get into trouble. Getting into trouble? Ileana said dubiously. You do know who you're talking to, right? Yeah, I do, and I've heard you scream and seen you pulling weeds almost as much as me. You don't need this. Besides, I'm okay. It was just a dream, Krista tried to reassure her. A dream coming from what? Your beatings? Goodness knows you get enough of them to warrant nightmares. You should report them as abuse. No student has ever been beaten so much for so little. Not even me, and I'm practically an outsider myself. I know, but who can I report to? Camille doesn't like me, and if anything would make the beatings worse. Laufey doesn't have the time of day for a student, let alone an outsider like me. It isn't fun, but I can handle it, Krista reassured her. It isn't right, Ileana continued. This goes against so many of our teachings. Yes, I know, Krista told her. She agreed with some of the teachings herself. After all, they made sense. Not all of them, such as those with special souls being higher beings than everyone else, and thus basically to be treated like gods among men, at least after they have been trained, but the more important ones. Do no harm unless your life is in mortal danger, and then do as little as possible. Do not abuse the ignorant, only teach them so that they do not continue in their folly. Treat others with respect even when they disrespect you. Treat special souls with the utmost respect, and students like children who are learning, to be guided and loved even when they make a mistake. It makes no sense to me either, but no one will listen. If anything, if I do report it, things will only get worse. I just have to write it out until I can earn their trust, or until my training is over. Well, they don't do a very good job converting people if all they do is abuse them, Ileana pouted. She still looked ready to leap up and sprint down the hall for a medic, but at least she had settled back on her own mattress finally, propping herself up on one arm and tossing her single thin blanket against the wall. I agree with you there, Krista told her only friend as she slowly and laboriously began stretching out her legs and arms, with many a grunt and groan and grimace as her muscles protested the movement. Here, let me help, Ileana offered. Before Krista could protest, Ileana had crawled over her mattress to Krista's, as Krista sat up stretching out her left leg by touching her toes with her leg extended, and began to push on Krista's back to aid in the stretching. Though her touch was gentle and slow to prevent injury, it sent a fiery burning sensation through Krista's back, causing her to cry out in pain. Ah! Ow! Stop it! She shrieked, hunching her back forward and rolling to the side to try to escape the agony on her back. It continued to burn fiercely for a few moments after she lay curled into a fetal position on her thin mattress. Wow, I barely touched you. Don't tell me they broke the skin this time, Ileana said, sounding both surprised and disturbed, as she began to gently lift at Krista's plain nightgown. Even Camille wouldn't do that. Let me take a look. Krista shrieked again in renewed pain as the garment tried to wiggle up her back, though it was pinned beneath her, and Ileana stopped long enough for her to sit up, still hunched over. Once upright, her nightgown came up to the back of her neck as Ileana examined her back. Oh, mi hermana, Ileana said softly. So many welts and bruises. That does it. I'm taking this to Laufey. Wait a minute, what is this? As Ileana traced a small circle on her back, Krista hissed through her teeth. Even the feather-light touch her friend used caused the pain to flare. Please don't touch that, she grunted. It hurts. As well it should. You have a nasty blister on your back shaped like a diamond ring, Ileana told her. You need to see a medic about this. I swear, if Camille is burning you now as punishment— She isn't, Krista interrupted. She didn't want to know what Ileana had planned if that had been the case. Most of those bruises are old and don't hurt now. The newer ones are from yesterday, and she used a leather strap for that. That blister wasn't there before we went to bed. How the hell did you get a ring-shaped blister on your back in the middle of the night? Let me check your mattress. I wouldn't put it past Sandra to put something in it to injure you, Ileana said peevishly as she began to push Krista aside. Ileana didn't get far in moving her friend when a knock came at their door. Both froze in place for a moment before looking at each other with identical looks on their faces, questioning who in the world would be awake at that hour besides them. Thinking quickly, Ileana turned out the lamp on the wall and leaped onto her mattress, while Krista toppled onto her side, muffling a grunt of pain with her blanket. Who is it? Ileana cried out, trying to sound groggy, though Krista wasn't sure it worked all that well. It's Neil, came a quiet, strained voice behind their plain wooden door. I know you two are awake. May I come in? With a sigh, Ileana turned the lamp back on and opened the door. Surprisingly, Neil stood in plain white scrub pants and a plain white t-shirt, his face haggard and tired, his hair messy, though it was always messy. His shirt wrinkled and rumpled like he'd had some difficulty sleeping. Why he would, though, was a curious question indeed, now that his wounds had healed to little more than pink scars. She had seen him once before in his pajamas when he had difficulty sleeping herself one night and tried to sneak down to the kitchen for some tea. He had caught her sneaking around and sent her back to her room for the next day, and the next day kept her after class to do extra push-ups as punishment. For some reason, he was one of the few teachers who did not send her to Camille needlessly. Usually, he set up punishments himself, and they were not unfair, at least in comparison to getting the leather strap for sneezing in class. Ileana stepped aside to let him in, and Krista realized that her robe was still up around her ribs. Her face burned, even though she clutched her blanket around her chest and stomach. How could Ileana let anyone in when she wasn't properly covered, let alone a man? Well, she had noticed that people around here had no compunctions about the human body, male or female. Many called her a prude, and perhaps she was. She still wasn't comfortable with women seeing her uncovered, so the possibility that Neil may have seen more skin than she wished mortified her. What's going on in here? He asked, sounding as though he hadn't noticed her indecent state. Well, indecent to her anyway. I could hear you two shrieking from down the hall. I'm surprised you haven't woken everybody up. You two should be asleep right now. Krista had a nightmare. I was just trying to calm her down, Ileana explained deferentially. Must have been a bad one, Neil said simply. Want to talk about it? Hey, where did those bruises come from? Is someone mistreating you? She's been beaten every day since she got here for minor infractions. Today, well, yesterday now. Yesterday Malik sent her to Camille for appearing to class unkempt. I was there. There wasn't a spot or wrinkle on her robes, and her hair was as neat as I've ever seen on anyone. He just took one glance at her and sent her to Camille for being unkempt. And now she has a blister on her back from something in her bed. I wouldn't put it past Sandra to... Wait, she's being beaten daily? Neil interrupted Ileana's tirade with a slicing motion of his hand to silence her, his voice cold with fury. And still being bullied. Krista, why didn't you tell me? It's okay, really, Krista squeaked as she hastily shoved her nightgown down around her waist and wrapped her blanket around her legs. No, it isn't, Ileana rounded on her, her eyes ablaze with fury. Nothing about this is okay. We are to be guided, not beaten on mere principle. This has to stop. In the morning, I'm going to Laufey to tell her what's going on. Noble though that is, she won't listen to a student, Neil told her, frowning. She's had students come to her before claiming abuse, and always there was no evidence, and plenty of witnesses to prove them wrong. It happens all the time. Besides, it sounds like Malik has it in for you, and he's on the council. She won't do anything without consulting the council and getting a majority vote. For that matter, it sounds like Camille has it out for you too, and she's also on the council. Samuel doesn't want you here either, and that's half the council right there. Still, I can intervene with Camille about your punishment and let Laufey know what's going on. Even if she doesn't do anything about it, she will know about it and make plans. She's a cunning woman and fair-minded. Thank you, Ileana said, finally seeming to relax for a moment. Probably because it seemed something would finally be done about the senseless abuse. Now, about that blister, Neil continued. Let me see it. No, Krista said, panicked. He had already seen more of her than she liked, causing her to feel exposed, a feeling she never could deal with very well. I won't hurt you, I promise. I'm your instructor and would never hurt you. Besides, Ileana's watching. Please? Neil said almost plaintively. Why he would plead to see her back was beyond her comprehension, aside from the possible fact that he was her instructor and felt responsible for her well-being. I just want to take a look at it, that's all. I won't touch it. I just want to see how bad it is. Krista hesitated. She was definitely not comfortable showing him her back, but at least it wasn't her chest or something like that, and having her nightgown back over it was making it sting again. Ileana must have seen this hesitation as a sign of near refusal, because she knelt next to her and looked her in the eye. Why don't you tell him about the nightmare you just had? You said it didn't change or go away when you realized it wasn't real. Krista had almost forgotten about the nightmare she'd had and regretted remembering it again when Ileana brought it up. She had never before been afraid of a dream where she threw herself into a tornado, but this time she had been terrified. Who was that woman she saw, and why did she want Krista to kneel to her so badly? Why her? I almost forgot about that part. You can tell me while I take a look at your back, Neil said, kneeling down in front of her, the lamp on the wall to his back, casting his face in shadows while giving him an almost ethereal glow. Ileana gave an exasperated click of her tongue for some reason and tried to give Neil a withering look, but she was the one who withered when he returned that same withering look on her. Krista wasn't sure what that was all about and didn't want to try guessing. She was tired now, and her back was stinging. She didn't like it at all, but she turned her back to Neil and began to pull up the back of her nightgown, though doing so set both her back and her face aflame in pain and shame, causing her to hiss through her teeth as the normally soft material brushed against the blister between her shoulder blades. Oh, wow, she could hear Neil say, and could almost hear the cringe in his voice. This is worse than I thought. So many bruises. There it is. That looks painful. It's so red and angry. I've never seen a blister form a perfect circle like this before. More like a diamond ring. It has that spot there. Krista was afraid his finger would touch the spot, he spoke of, and she braced herself for pain, but it did not come. Instead, a cool, tingling sensation washed over the area where the blister was, soothing the area. It sent a shiver up her spine, but she did not protest. Even the bruises in that area seemed to be soothed by it. "That's the best I can do," he declared, as he gently pulled her nightgown back down to her waist. "I never was very good at healing wounds. How does that feel?" "Much better. The stinging is gone," Krista told him, surprised. "What did you do? Even the bruises feel better." "Healing," he told her simply. "Anyone who has passed their training learns how, but some can do it better than others. I did the best I could, but as it is, it will scar. Tell me about this nightmare. You can explain later why you didn't tell me about the systematic abuse. You can expect sit-ups later in class for that, by the way." Krista cringed to herself. She hated sit-ups. Her large belly flap got in the way, preventing her from coming all the way up into a sit-up, and it was embarrassing, particularly since she was the only person on the whole campus that was morbidly obese. Everyone else was the weight they were supposed to be, some with a little pudge at the very most, and all of them able to do a simple sit-up with ease. For that matter, she hated push-ups for much the same reason, except that she was so heavy she couldn't push herself back up without modifying the exercise. She could feel people's disdain at her poor physical shape when they looked at her like a weight on her shoulders and back. And that was always multiplied when she had to exercise in front of people, simply because she couldn't do things as perfectly as everyone else, or with as much ease. Well, at least it wasn't jogging or jumping jacks. She couldn't go much further than a city block without wheezing. She'd had asthma from a young age, from before she became heavy, and jumping jacks made her leak. Both exercises made loud noises with her belly flap slapping against her as she moved, and she hated it. "Sorry, Neil-sensei," she said automatically as she turned to face him, keeping the blanket wrapped around her legs and hips. In his private lessons with her to teach her their beliefs and theology, he called it a remedial course, since everyone else was raised in that theology and she needed to keep up with the rest of her classes, which revolved around that theology. He asked her to just call him by his first name, but in her exercise class she was to call him Neil-sensei, and the latter had become an automatic response for her. "Do that again outside of class and I'll assign more," he said sternly, and she knew what he meant. "Sorry, Neil," she corrected herself. "Well, I was in a grass field that was very flat." As she recounted her nightmare, surprised and dismayed that it was still so clear in her head, she watched as Ileana's and Neil's eyes grew wider and wider. She left out the parts where she wanted to jump into the tornado, where the woman offered her a quick and painless death, where that had been a temptation for her. She didn't want to worry them any more than they already were. This was a problem they could not fix. It had been that way since she was 12, or so she thought. That was how old she was when she realized what was going on in her head, though it had been that way for some time before that. She did, however, give in great detail the fire that engulfed her at the end, and the woman's words, still as clear in her head as ever. She wished she could forget the whole thing. It was that woman's words, repeated aloud, that drew Neil's dark eyebrows down in a concerned furrow. She was suddenly glad she couldn't see his eyes, shadowed as they were by the lamp behind him on the wall. With everyone hating her for being an outsider, she didn't want to see him or Ileana afraid of her. She refused to look at her now silent friend, afraid of what she might find on her face. "Those were her words exact?" Neil asked. "Yes. Who is she? Why does she want me? Was it real? Dreams can't be real, can they?" she asked nervously, fear rising in her when Neil hesitated. "For everyone else, dreams are just dreams," he said finally. "Even for us. No one can enter a dream outside of their own as they sleep, no matter how much they want to. We can do many things, but we can do little with the mind and nothing with dreams." "It sounds like a regular nightmare to me, if a weird one." "But she spoke to me," Krista protested, "offering me things and burned me when I—" "Just another weird dream," Neil cut off her protest. She could have known She should have known better than to object. One did not object to their teachers around here, not without punishment. Still, it had been too real to be a dream. What about the blister on her back? Ileana protested further before she could. Where did that come from? Just a vicious prank. I'll find out who and make them regret it, Neil said simply as he stood up. Enough talking. It's past time for bed. Go back to sleep. Krista lay back on her mattress to comply. She didn't want any more punishment than she'd already earned. But Ileana did not. Instead, she stood, meeting Neil's eye, even though she was several inches shorter than he, defiance plain in her face. But I said enough, Ileana. You just earned yourself a meeting with Camille in the morning for disobedience. Don't tell her about Krista's dream, though. Krista doesn't need that kind of attention over a simple nightmare. Neil said as he left through the door that Ileana had forgotten to shut earlier, closing it behind her. It struck Krista as strange that he would dismiss her nightmare as not being real, but not let her tell Camille about it. His tone was simple and dismissive, but something seemed off about him. He seemed to be hiding something. Maybe he was afraid of her now, and the door had not been shut the whole time they were talking. Who knows who overheard them or peeked in without her noticing to see what was going on and quietly continued on. That thought alone made her face burn more, enough to make her cover her head in her blanket. The burning did not stop, but at least Ileana wouldn't see her reddened face. As though hit by a sack of bricks, a sack that still pressed on her chest and shoulders with a weight she could not bear much longer, a wave of fear and certainty washed over Krista. Surely that had not just been a dream. Neil was hiding it from her for some reason. He was afraid of her now, and so was Ileana. Worse, she could not blame them. She was afraid of herself, of that woman in her dream, offering her power, peace, or pain. Had she been a demon? Satan himself come to tempt her? Did that mean she was cursed, something to be feared and locked away? Suddenly, her embarrassment at her exposure seemed so small beside the great weight of fear and self-loathing that she felt. Tears began to sting her eyes and stream down her face, and her breath came in quiet hitches. She did not want Ileana to hear or see her crying. She hated crying as it was, and it was worse when someone saw or heard her cry. "Good night, Krista," she could hear Ileana say, as she turned out the lamp and shuffled back to her own mattress on the floor. Krista tried to respond, but her voice caught in her throat with another hitch. She could no more speak without it being obvious that she was crying than she could have lifted the building they slept in on her own. Instead, she remained silent, hoping that Ileana would fall asleep quickly and take her silence to mean that she too was asleep, or at least trying. She listened to her roommate's breathing gradually become slower and deeper, signaling sleep, as she softly wept to herself, dampening the sheet that covered her mattress. She wept until she could no longer breathe through her nose, as she had nothing to blow her nose with, and was sure that the noise would awaken Ileana. She then realized she had let herself get carried away with her tears. Thus, she went through her meditation exercises, taking 3 deep, slow breaths, focusing on where she felt the breath the most. In this case, it was her chest and abdomen, and closing her eyes. The fear was still there, overwhelming, but as she focused solely on her breath, the fear began to ease, and she began to consciously relax all of her muscles. Before she knew it, she'd fallen into a deep and dreamless sleep.